to kick us off, really excited to be here. For background, Will Dickson, I'm a director here at FedTech. I lead our accelerators portfolio. Just a quick background on FedTech, we're a venture building organization, as it relates to SBA, Small Business Administration, we're what you would call an entrepreneur support organization, an ESO. So we want to run a variety of programs. If you're an aspiring entrepreneur out there looking to get into, starting a business around some really cool deep tech innovation from federal research labs or academia, we run our startup studio programs. You can participate there. Our accelerators, working with established businesses. That was how we kind of got in contact with Drew first, many months ago, and have been working with him. And then we have a variety of other programs where we train researchers around entrepreneurship and commercialization within large labs as well. Been with FedTech about 2.5 years, engineer by background, and really enjoy, what really gets me up out of bed every morning is to know that we can work with folks like Drew and different businesses around the country in deep tech and even internationally, helping unlock the benefits of technology through entrepreneurship, kind of blending that entrepreneurial mindset with some core science-based innovations across the US and globally. So to get us started, again, today we're going to talk, about, the SBIR program and its impact and, and a real impact, right, with an awesome startup here. Drew Arenth is the Chief Business Officer for Macro Eyes. And to get started, I'll kind of let him tell history. He's got a really cool background and story and perspective, I think, on, being a senior leader at a deep tech startup. So Drew, go ahead and take it away. I would love to hear your background to kick us off.
Sure, you bet. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate, Will and Robert and the FedTech team and the folks out there on the FedTech team that I've had the chance to work with to be able to talk here today. And looking at these chats coming through, I'd love to talk with a lot of you all about what you all are doing. So you already got me excited about what you're up to. So hopefully we can learn from you in this as well. But it's a pleasure to be here again. Drew Arenth. I do have a bit of a diverse background. It's been a pretty fun and lucky journey for me. I'll go through it pretty quickly and bring you to where I am today. But I started working, and this sort of got me back. This brings us full circle eventually, but working at a very small startup marketing firm and really focused on getting communications and marketing out for what would be considered sort of grassroots marketing. So how do you tell a story? How do you get people on board with an idea, something that maybe exists and sometimes something that doesn't quite exist yet, which was a very interesting practice for me to start in. Can you take an idea and bring folks on board with it in a very pointed way? And I think that's been very useful to me today. After that, I jumped basically to the other end of the spectrum, and I started working in the much less sexy, much less dynamic world of tugboats. And this was tugboats, really just exactly what you think about. Think of the harbor in San Francisco Bay, Seattle, Washington, Portland, and Oregon, and then ended up leading international business development. We were logistics and supply chain for primarily oil and gas and energy customers. I worked with all the big oil companies on upstream exploration, and then a bit of movement of crude as well. So I worked a lot on programs and projects in the Middle East, Africa, Alaska, and the Gulf of Mexico. Did that for a while, and then close to a decade, I suppose, and then decided I wanted to. I sort of helped, and this is something we'll talk about a little bit more, but I helped put together the original tranche of funding for this organization, Macro Eyes, that I work with directly now. The people that were thinking through the idea of Macro Eyes about a decade ago now were incredibly intelligent. I thought the direction that they wanted to go was a very good idea, and so helped do a bit of that funding. And in doing so, started talking quite a bit about healthcare and healthcare strategy, and ended up getting a role to learn more about it from the inside as a principal strategist for an enormous not-for-profit healthcare system on the West Coast called Providence St. Joseph Health. I saw a few of you from out on the West Coast. Providence St. Joseph Health owns Swedish Medical up in Seattle as well, and sat below their executive team to work on sort of key strategic initiatives for them. My purview for the most of my tenure there was to try to figure out how to bring these two enormous supply chains that were coming together through a merger. How do you make those supply chains a supply chain of the future? How do I think about supply chain from a health context and something that I'd worked in for many, many years before? And how do we make it something of, something that drives innovation, drives intelligence, drives more operationally efficient actions by senior leaders and at every end node of that giant healthcare network. And that really got me thinking critically about data at the time as well. A core piece of what we were trying to do in healthcare is still trying to do. So I saw some of you are working in the healthcare space. Bringing data together in a place that's able to be used meaningfully is extremely, extremely challenging. So doing that with a big system that was not fully integrated yet posed a lot of challenges. So you have disparate data, you have dirty data, you have inaccessible data, and you're still supposed to drive something that's foundational as a supply chain to do better work. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that until I came on board full time with Macrise. And so that's sort of where we are today.
Awesome. And for the audience, Drew, to give more context, can you give us as every good entrepreneur should do, right? Can you give us a quick pitch of what, what's Macrise, what's its vision, what's its differentiator real quick?
Yeah, who the hell is Macrise? So yeah, Macrise is enterprise software for supply chains. Our foundations lie in machine learning and artificial intelligence. Our chief scientist is a professor of machine learning and large-scale optimization at MIT. He's one of the leading experts in the world on large-scale optimization. Recently won the Humboldt Prize out of Germany for some of his work and opened up a lab over there. We brought AI and machine learning and our approach to it sort of as our hammer, I guess, if we talk in sort of the startup world nomenclature. We brought that hammer to this space and said, well, if we brought it, and the founder and CEO of this organization, Benjamin Fells, he was a quantitative hedge fund trader. And so that's one of the early spaces where machine learning and AI was deployed in what would be considered sort of a wild in an operational environment where it's actually making decisions. But it's still finance, it's still hedge funds, it's still working in almost sort of just a near neighbor to laboratory work. And we felt that there is a space where we can bring together symbiotically data intelligence and operational procedure. And so we started sort of narrowing that in. And with my experience in supply chain, I really felt that, and I hate saying this, but it is really true in this case, that supply chain is the thing that floats all boats in a business. It is everything on which a business relies, and historically has been treated a bit like sort of a dumb skeleton. Like it's there, everything kind of moves it around. When it breaks, everybody gets really pissed off at it, but otherwise it's kind of ignored. But I believe that it's really a central nervous system. It touches everything. All data about a business, whether it's finance, whether it's purchasing, whether it's the human resource aspect, all comes in and out through the supply chain, which means it should know everything. It should be the central place for any data-driven decision. And so we're really trying to push that mentality, and we're doing that through AI and machine learning on logistics and supply chain management.
Awesome. Yeah, super helpful.
Sorry, I'll add one more piece that we have focused on, and this is important because of this conversation, which is around defense work a lot. We've focused on deploying that in really the most challenging operational contexts in the world, operational and data contexts in the world, really. We've done quite a bit of work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and USAID as well on global development, primarily in the global health space. So imagine deploying machine learning and AI in Chad or Nigeria or northern Mozambique. These are areas where when we used to go into meetings at the Gates Foundation, people would sort of laugh us out of the room. They're like, you have no idea what kind of data you're getting yourself into. And we believed that we could do it. We believed that there were approaches that we had in our tool belt that could enable us to learn a lot across an incredibly wide breadth of data sources and fill in blanks where a single data source simply can't perform. Using satellite imagery, using pictures, using natural language directly from chats. And we put all those pieces together and said, with this, we can't rely on a single data source, but with all of these pieces put together, can we paint a picture of supply and demand? Yeah. And so that's what ultimately led us to the work with the DoD.
Yeah, wonderful there. And even, anecdotally, I used to work in the automotive industry, and I'm a believer that the supply chain to make something as complex as vehicles at that scale is one of the wonders of the world. If anyone's ever been to an automotive factory and the timing of when parts show up and how they show up and the physical placing and traffic and border control, right? All that stuff is analyzed and taken into account. So it's really cool to hear, about Macrise taking a more advanced kind of technology focused approach to doing that. Let's kind of jump into, I think, thoughts on SBIR, right? So Small Business Innovation Research, colloquially known as America's Seed Fund, right? It funds small business innovation in the private sector, sponsored by government entities. For everyone's awareness, right, the SBIR budget for each entity is calculated as a percentage of the total R&D spend of that entity. So you have organizations like Department of Defense, Department of Energy, who do a lot of intramural research and development within the United States, having the largest budgets, but every government agency usually has some flavor of SBIR. So Drew, wanted to ask, I think, jump into it, right? SBIR, just again, we'll set the background. SBIR, non-dilutive funding, right? The government usually expects, a negotiation where they have a right to purchase technology, if it is for that defense use case, especially, developed by SBIR, but it's kind of an alternative funding mechanism to pay for research and development. Yeah. Fun fact that venture capital, that's the funder for startups. Actually is only a third as large as R&D, as government-sponsored R&D spending for deep tech funding in the private sector. That's kind of pre-prototype, pre-saleable prototype, right? So, but I think Drew has some really interesting thoughts on, for Macrise, how do you think about SBIR for your business? What did it allow you to do? What's your perspective on, hey, I'm an entrepreneur, I want to think about winning an SBIR award. How can it be valuable to me?
Yeah, that's an amazing stat. I didn't know that. I mean, that's a lot of money. That's pretty incredible. Yeah, so the way that we thought about SBIRs, and we've thought about SBIRs in a few contexts, in the DoD context, defense space, but we also thought about it with NIH, and we have applied for NIH funding through SBIRs, not successfully, I will say, but each one of them is very different. So I will start by saying, like, if you're applying to SBIRs in one space and you find it doesn't fit your business, keep looking, and the approach, not just your business, but your expertise. Each one relies on something very different. I like for some of the work that we build and some of the SBIR approaches, it's really about understanding operations and understanding that impact it'll have at the end. Some of it is extremely scientific. So if you find yourself, if you're extremely scientific and they're like, well, let's talk about impact in business and all this stuff, maybe that's not the best fit for you personally, and maybe not the best fit for your business, but there are others out there that are extremely scientific. So that's sort of a sidebar there. But so what has SBIR meant to us? We are an organization that didn't take meaningful venture funding for 8 years of our existence. We really relied on making money, going out, trying to provide impact, and create value for customers. And that's great. And it enabled us to maintain control of our business over time. Love venture capital, love all the investors. If there are anybody out there, I love you all, but also afraid of handing over the reins of something that we care very, very deeply about. So it was a wise move in that sense. It was very selfish in our part. We did grow, we have been successful. Maybe we could have grown faster with venture money, but we would have lost control. SBIR provided an opportunity for us to be a little bit riskier and think a little bit bigger into new markets in a way we hadn't been able to do when we were relying on someone kind of understanding where we want to go and having some faith in us that we could get them there. Generally, you tell a customer, hey, I don't have this thing in my pocket. I want to take a risk and build this with you. And if you get lucky, they take that bet with you and you get to build something meaningful for them. But if you try to build something that sounds really crazy, or you say, hey, this is going to take 2-3 years, they're going to laugh you out of the building and you run out of money and you're not going to be a business anymore. Now, the interesting part about SBIRs is that it is research, but it is operationally driven research in the context that we've done it with the DoD. And we saw this as a way to take non-dilutive funding. They don't own the product. They don't own the business. They help you build out something that is meaningful to them. And they allow you to take risks and stage that build out if you're smart about it. So we saw this as, okay, SBIR money can go into something that we think we can build. We get a partner, they help us understand ground truth, and we get to sort of go through this cycle of learning and pushing new ideas. And it's been very successful for us. I think we've had 3 SBIR phase 1s and a couple of SBIR phase 2s. We're working on a tactical finance right now based off of one of those SBIR phase 2s. But we've been able to test a lot of those and build into new customers and new spaces that we haven't had the chance to in the past. And
Yeah, great way of framing. Yeah, I think it's obviously it'll pay for R&D, but right from a business perspective, right, that's the funded R&D that also allows you to do customer discovery and market analysis for something like defense, right, or highly regulated energy markets, or
totally,
think Department of Transportation. They have a SBIR program, right? You could say, hey, let's think about the public sector needs of transportation technology at the local, state, federal level, right? So really cool thinking. It's funded customer discovery and work to explore a new market, right? Which, again, to your point, private financial investors like venture capital may not take that risk with you, right? It's maybe a harder sell to to do a lot more homework up front to say, hey, I got to prove, before I get invested in to go after the transportation market, I got to prove I'll do all the homework to show I can do it, right? Where SBIR, you only have to prove that you can do some interesting research and development, right? Prove or disprove some hypotheses there. So
yeah, and that's, I mean, to your point, that's the cool part about these SBIR phase 1s that were just amazing to me before. I mean, you think about business development and doing that market testing with venture money. If you miss one, you better hit the next one, because they're going to wonder why you spent money flying around and talking to people, or doing a little bit of piloting here and there. So the SBIR phase 1s was really amazing. The very first one that I got, I said, what do I have to deliver? They said, give me a list of people that you talked to. What was meaningful? What'd you learn? Give us your report. And I'm like, wow, that's incredible. Like, that usually comes out of my salary, or that comes out of my VC money for me to go do that. For a small business, that's extremely powerful, and really opened up. And it's, I think, especially in the defense space, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit more, but did not, as you heard, I didn't say I used to be in the Marines or the Army or the Navy. I didn't come from this space. This is all learning for me. I did a bit of transportation with Maritime Command back in the day with my tug work. But that's a learning experience, and that can be really, really expensive. And so for them to take a bet on people that they think, hey, you got a good idea, you seem like smart people, and here, we'll pay you to go sit around at the Pentagon and talk to as many people as you can. That's so valuable. That was so valuable for us. Now you have to turn those into something. And I will throw my gauntlet down to everybody on this call. I've learned we are extremely lucky as an organization. If you guys get a chance, this is the one thing I will definitely brag about. You should go look at the team we have. Like, these people are so smart. They're so driven. They're incredibly well educated and successful. We're just very lucky to work with them. And part of that is because we have committed to deliver impact in a variety of ways. Some of that is mission-driven impact. The spaces that we work in, even in the for-profit part of our work and private sector, it's still mission-driven. We're still trying to do something meaningful. But we're also not going to take their technology and put it on a shelf. And so transitioning through those SBIR phase 1s into SBIR phase 2s, that's great. SBIR phase 2 does not mean you have a license. It does not mean that your technology is the hand of the warfighter. So we have an obligation to some of our scientists who have told us, I will leave you if you do that to me, to make sure that happens. And I know there are SBIR shops out there that like to go get SBIRs, make some money off the SBIRs, pay their paycheck, put it on a shelf, and move on. I think that's a damn shame. And I think it's an insult to the dedication this country's given to making this money available. Research is not for people's entertainment. We're trying to move things forward. And I hope that everybody here takes that mentality of this. I'm never going to tell you all what to do again, but that one I will put my gauntlet down. So.
Yeah, and even maybe helpful. I can share things on how the SBIR programs have changed over the past few years, right? If anyone's familiar with the U.S. Air Force's program, AFWorks, right? They kind of were the first ones to really think critically. Hey, congressionally, we can actually do a lot of creative things with this SBIR money, right? We could, like the one Drew is describing, the phase 1 for an AFWorks, when they invented it was primarily doing customer discovery. Like, basically prove someone in the Air Force, and not with SBIR funds, right? prove that they have a problem they might pay for one day, right? And come back to us and propose what that problem that you can solve with technology, right? It's for R&D funds. So, AFWERX was maybe one of the first ones to do that, 2017, 2018. But a lot of different programs are now starting to take slightly more creative approaches, right? All really in the spirit, as Drew is alluding to there, of transition, right? They want, the organization sponsoring SBIR, they want to see it in impact. Right now, it is different, like the Department of Defense, right? They do buy a lot of stuff, right? They are the end customer for a lot of things funded by SBIR. Department of Energy is not that customer, right? They don't buy a lot of, products, they don't, fund the, United States energy infrastructure, right? That's private sector. And so, if you're on a Department of Energy grant, right, you might want to tell a great story about, hey, this research I'm doing here will eventually make it out to, home charging stations for electric vehicles or solar panels in the private industry, or, hey, here's the business model we know we're going to have to grow into to figure out how to commercialize this through highly regulated markets. So just a general theme of how we've seen at FedTech, especially a lot of the defense programs think about SBIR is really about transition, right? Meaning, okay, SBIR is great, but what's next, right? And, there's a few questions in the chat we can kind of answer a little bit here about what's the secret. So there's no secret answer, right? There's no, the answers to the test you can find and submit it and you're going to win your first award. But definitely, encourage everyone to do some homework and try to tell the story of transition, right? Hey, how will this investment, right? It's not an equity investment like venture capital, but the government sees it as an investment. How will this invest in the technology work I'm going to do, funded by the government here, by the DoD? How will that eventually provide even more value to the Department of Defense, right? What's that roadmap? Well, who are your end customers? What's the pathway? How long is it going to take, right? How much is it going to cost? What's the risk? What's the amazing, benefit to the warfighter, right, or society for the DOE? So little sideways there, but it just wanted to highlight there are a lot of different flavors of SBIR today. And even I wanted to kind of pass it back to Drew here to elaborate. So he mentioned he's won an Air Force SBIR. Now, I think recently looking at Army SBIR, right? Some of the new applied SBIR programs. So can you share a little bit more about those two programs specifically and how you view those as part of your business model?
Yeah, so this is actually, I was going to say something that's actually ties well together. So one thing I would say is, what's the secret sauce? There are two things I think about. One, know thyself. So know your business and know where you are. And per what we're about to talk about, there are a lot of different versions of SBIR phase ones and ways you can start the process. And the AFWERX SBIRs that I had gotten previously, that I mentioned previously, excuse me, those were really like ideation and discovery. Hey, we like going back to that, we have a hammer. Tell us about your problem. I mean, I went in talking about optimized distribution of health commodities to A4 logistics and walked out talking about pre-positioning of hydraulic jacks. Totally discovery stuff. That's for your $50,000, you have a report at the end. There are other SBIR phase ones that are $150,000 and you have to pilot something. So, we had the pleasure of participating in this xTech Search 6, and we were one of the winners of that, which is fantastic. And some of the other teams have things that there's like, I have this thing built. I don't need to go have a conversation to see if you need it. I know you do. I need to show you that you need this one. So if you know where you are in your product development or where you are in a business, there are certain types of SBIR phase ones that you're going to want to go for. And for $150,000, that means you can spend some real time going and showing the product, actually getting a little bit of feedback on your product, specifically doing a little bit of development, and then getting to that next phase. So if you know where you are, you can find the right SBIR phase one as that input. So I think that's just an important piece. And the second piece that I was going to say is your end customer is really, really important. And I would have, in my experience, and we have not yet transitioned to a license. So I'll just say that now. Your end customer is what will enable you to do that. Excuse me, your end user, I was mixing these up, your customer and end user. That end user is extremely valuable because that customer, the buyer, won't sign unless that user is 100% on board. So I would, if you're lucky enough to get an end user, go spend the time with those people, get them to know who you are. And then once you get them, find another end user. Because your end user it's a group, it's a team, it's an office, it's a division, but it's also a person. And if that person moves, you might lose that user. So you got to get integrated with that user group pretty deep. Don't rely on that one person. It's a huge mistake. I've made this mistake all over the world, from talking to like a minister of health or even a senior advisor to the president of certain countries. That person goes and you're back to ground zero. So the recipe for success is redundancy. And maybe it's because I come from the tugboat industry where you always have 2 engines and 2 props, but 2 steering units, everything. Redundancy is key. So yeah, sorry. So to go back to your question about, we participated in xTech Search 6. We were one of the lucky winners, on top of which we got the SBIR phase 1 after that, which is a cool program. It's a very different experience to get to that SBIR phase 1 than AFWorks, which is just an application. The Army ones, and I've seen this a couple of times, and I don't know it hugely in depth. This is when I need my friend Jeff, who worked with us from FedTech, who was awesome, to chime in and help me out here. But the Army seems to have a lot of these different competitions, which helps narrow the field, and they get to know you quite a bit more. But then you're pretty well embedded when you get started. And the cool part about that is if you're early stage around some ideas, they really walk you through that process. It's a very engaged process. But when you get down to, so you kind of go through this thing where you get to learn a lot in the process, which is valuable in and into itself. And if you get to the next phase, you're no longer competing with 1,000 companies for one of these SBIRs. Things are narrowed down significantly. And at the end, I think there were 20 finalist companies in that one that I think a subset of us got a win, and then a subset of that I think gets the SBIR. But you're talking about 20 companies rather than 1,000 companies or whatever go for these.
No, great. And even, I think zooming out for, aspiring entrepreneurs, other small businesses in the audience here, right? There's also a theme in the government, right? That they're trying to make it more accessible, right? SBIR program stuff that historically was, again, the government's a complicated place. It's got a lot of people, a lot of budget, a lot of necessary bureaucracy, and it moves, thinking about nation state timelines, which are not startup timelines, right? So inherently it's hard to understand. That's okay. But, there's lots of good organizations. Again, he's referencing, if you Google Army xTech Search, it's kind of a suite of prize competitions that are intended to lower that barrier for technology companies on behalf of learning about Army use cases. Air Force has AFWorks, right? Other prize competition, and even things that the government will call test and evaluation events, where you can kind of show up and showcase your tech in a very easy kind of pitch day way versus, I got to figure out all the paperwork for contracting. So we're writing and Drew, referring to one of those awesome themes of kind of the government trying to make itself more accessible to top thinkers and especially deep tech, advanced technology from across the nation.
So I'll add to that the accessibility piece. So if you find somebody, another big challenge, which we're still going through, is finding the exact right program office that you're going to work with. And those program offices, if you find somebody that knows program offices, pay them a lot of money. If you find somebody that knows program offices and can get you in touch with those people, pay them 3 times whatever you're making, because that is how you're going to understand the problem. That is how you're going to understand who your users are going to be. It's how you're going to understand how you contract with them. It's extremely valuable. So that's like a big hurdle. I talked to one of the previous xTech Search winners, since we're talking about that Army program, said something that really stuck with me when we had a chance to chat with him. That he said he was working on something that was, now I'll probably mess it up, so if he's out there listening, I apologize, but the concept is there. He was talking to a program office and he wasn't getting anywhere. He spent a good amount of time doing this. And it was a program office for technology that was for helicopters. He found out he was talking to the program office for technology outside of helicopters, and he should have been talking to the program office for the inside of the helicopter, that particular tail unit. So you have to be really, you have to really think critically, because you never know what that next move should actually be. And he said he spent so much time talking to this group that was just they didn't know they weren't the right buyer, and he didn't know they weren't the right buyer. And then as soon as he got to this team that sits inside the helicopter, they were like, that's exactly what we need, because they also operate themselves outside of the helicopter. And he was working on the stabilizing platform for rescue stuff.
Yeah, great comment there, Drew. And again, just another takeaway, right, for the audience: approach every conversation with a learning mindset, right? Yeah. chances that you understand exactly how the government organizes itself and makes decision are minuscule or almost impossible that anyone actually understands that at scale. So everything, hey, what organization are you in? What are your priorities? What other people do you work with, right? Try to approach all those conversations, not, that's probably the biggest mistake. Statistically, the reason most startups fail is because there's no need, right? But another way of thinking about that is a lot of people show up pitching. It's like, hey, I know I got the next best battery technology for you, without asking questions, right? Without doing customer discovery and learning activities. So just translating that. I want to move on to another question and kind of move to, hey, dual use business models, meaning defense and commercial government markets, right? Complicated to manage that. But you also wanted to share some, Drew, about other kind of helpful resources for startups. I think you mentioned something yesterday about challenges, but what are some other helpful, easy to access resources that other kind of startups and entrepreneurs can think about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm definitely not the expert on this. I will say that, what we talked about yesterday was this thing called Gates Grand Challenges. So Grand Challenges I think they were originally started by USAID, and then Gates picked them up, and then there's Grand Challenges Canada, and there's all sorts of, they're called Grand Challenges. You go look it up. There's all sorts of different types out there, and they're a similar concept, mostly for the global development space. I'd be wary of some of these Grand Challenges for you all working in the private sector space. A lot of them are for some of you, if you want to go, put an idea out there, build it up a little bit, sell it, and be done. Then they might be good. But a lot of those private sector ones are really about hey, bring us some ideas. Maybe we hire you. Maybe we buy your company. Maybe we give you a little bit of money. You get to market test it for us. Then we buy your company. There's a lot of IP stuff out there. I think in the global development space, these Grand Challenges are great ways to pressure test ideas. And we did this many, many years ago. We've won a few of these Grand Challenges. And we kept asking ourselves, as we grew, is this the right thing for us to be spending time doing? It takes executive leadership participation. Who are your best ideas, people, and thinkers? Throw them at something that maybe you're going to get $25,000 for, $50,000 to go test and talk about. It's a lot of time investment, a very expensive and valuable time. But what we sort of found is it makes us keep thinking about the future. We often get bogged down in the idea of thinking about what's our technology today, or okay, we've already written our future. It's in stone. Let's go to it. And this is one of those opportunities to pressure test with a lot of experts and a lot of eyes on, because a lot of people look at this and they're usually really smart people. Let's put an idea out there, and maybe you get a little feedback and you get no money, or maybe you get money and you're like, okay, that's an interesting validation point. Now I get paid to talk about it a little bit more and think through it a little bit more. Maybe it becomes an additional scribe on that stone of the future. So those are pretty cool mechanisms out there. Some of the other mechanisms are some of these accelerator programs, and I think there are good ones and there are bad ones. We've had some great experiences. Actually, the Ensign Propel did one that was really, really good as well. They bring the key for those. Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends. Again, know yourself, know what you need, make sure that they're providing it. Some of them are focused on getting you venture money and investment. Some of them are focused on pressure testing your ideas and getting pilots. That to me is the most valuable. Some of them are to teach you how to run a business. And for a little bit, that's really nice. After you do about 7 of them, you feel like maybe you should be telling them how to do this stuff. But yeah, so you just have to know where you're at and seek those out. But those are the Grand Challenges thing, I think, are pretty great.
Awesome. Yes, and another example, lots of governments and just large organizations sponsored accelerators as a way to make them more accessible, right? It's another tool in the toolkit. And like Drew said, if you're thinking about entering those, asking about their business model, see if they take equity. And also, like he said, hey, what's your secret sauce? Like, I know that there's 20 other accelerators that feel a lot like you. What am I going to get out of your specific version of an accelerator?
Yeah.
So
be very critical. And if you can get into one, you'll probably be interested. There'll be a bunch of them that'll be interested in you. So pick the ones that are going to be useful to you.
Yep. Cool. Kind of a follow-on question here, Drew. We're talking more just about general business model stuff. We talked a lot about SBIR, right? It's a good front door to government use cases, government sponsored research and development, right? Non-dilutive, can be very valuable when used appropriately. But can you share with us how you manage kind of the commercial aspect of a business too, right? You know, a lot of feedback we get when we at FedTech, we talk with investors. They're like, oh, you know, when I talk to a company, I want them to focus on one thing, right? That means I want them to choose defense or choose commercial and not do anything else. But can you help us think through how you balance, you know, hey, what's my commercialization plan in the private sector versus my commercialization plan in maybe a defense or government use case?
Yeah, I would definitely say that the money can be a distraction. It can pull you off in different directions. I don't know if it's a controversial view of supply chain. I've had a lot of people think that I'm an idiot because I think this, but I think supply chains are the same pretty much across sectors. There are a few key differences in supply chains. You know, from consumables, you know, if you look at Starbucks, they have a shelf life. They also need refrigeration. So does the medical sector. That's one of the major differentiating facts. There are definitely slight differences here and there, but the foundations of a supply chain remain pretty consistent. So that's what I think is, we think of ourselves as technology providers for a horizontal rather than a vertical sector. So that's an advantage that we have. Now, you will get pulled in multiple directions. If you go read up about us, we're working with AFRL and AVSOC through AFWERX SBIRs on GPS denied technology. So can you tell somebody where they are when there's no GPS, whether that's denied, degraded, or spoofed? And that's a bit tangential. It's what we would consider supply chain visibility. There's a lot being done around sensors and logistics and supply chain right now. Can you use those sensors to better understand where something is because you don't have a GPS chip or whatever you need on that particular item, so you can see where all your stuff is around the world. So we're solving that sort of through a different way. It's a little bit tangential to what we do in the private sector. One of the cool things is that maybe we bought into the doctrine of SBIRs, but the idea of dual use is if we build something in the private sector, we should be able to try to slap it on a use case in the DoD and vice versa. And so, we're doing that, and we are very specific about that. And we have folks. One of the things that we have focused on is making sure that if somebody's working on something in the DoD, they're working on something similar deployments in the private sector. That individual, not just our team, but like obviously we want to do that with the technology. But you know, Steve's really good at doing work for the DoD, and he's done a bunch of it, and he's developed technology. He's now deploying some of those ideas for our private sector customers and for customers in the health sector. So tying that individual across and saying, this is your mission, is to get this thing out there, whether it's on this side of the fence or that side of the fence, you're really selling us the same technology. You're going to get pushback, definitely. And I would say that the bigger threat from SBIRs, I think, is the tranched nature of the funding. So that's something that when you're trying to balance the two and you're looking at workflows and looking at delivery points along this way, you have to be pretty smart about the fact that governments are all the love in the world to the US government. They're a little fickle in their funding. You know, sometimes Congress doesn't do what it's supposed to do and things don't get approved and there's no money. This year was the perfect example. At the beginning of this year, they skipped at least one cycle on these SBIRs for the Air Force and for several others. Money didn't get approved. That's really dangerous for a business. So I would say that you can tie your product across this and just say, this is a huge customer. Don't undervalue the incredible value of saying that you work with the Department of Defense and with the US government. You go tell private sector folks that, they get pretty excited. So there's value in that you should make sure your investors know about. But the biggest threat, I think, is the timing of that funding and how smart you are about managing resources when you might not get funding for, for us, we had a 7-month gap between these two that we were not expecting because the funding cycle disappeared.
Yeah, no, great. Again, I think that's usually the first thing we tell companies when they're learning about SBIR as well, is that the government should never be your first customer or your only customer. They are a great intermediary customer, help you develop stuff once it's proven, like Drew said, go back and forth. The Defense Innovation Unit, for example, is famous for saying, hey, we're going to buy commercial off the shelf stuff and get it modified for defense, meaning they're not really funding research, they're funding the purchase of commercial equipment that's really, really good and just asking for slight modifications to a defense use case, right? So lots of ways, but, encourage. And even another thing we wanted to hit, Drew, is again, the kind of mentality for building businesses. And you and I talked about this, right? But as a small company, you're naturally going to overextend yourself. You're naturally going to maybe overpromise to say, hey, we can do it. I'm going to make you so happy, right? You get a signal that a customer is, has a little demand. You're like, oh my gosh, let me start work. Let me start doing extra research for you, right? But also, right, can you balance the respect you got to have for other business entities, right? That, stuff may happen that's out of your control. Most entities will protect themselves, right, if they're in severe danger. So can you share, we talked about a little bit about that yesterday, but can you share your thought just on making sure to keep that kind of mature professionalism, we'll call it, even though you're looking to really satisfy new customers?
Yeah, no, my theory is customer's always wrong. No, I'm kidding. The way that we, or sort of a motto that we live by is demo or die. And this can be in anything. So your job is to demo. Somebody tells you they want something and you say, oh, I can provide this. And they say, yeah, that's great. If they don't really know what that is, it's really easy to say yes to you offering them something. But whether they're really going to use it, you have to kind of demo it to them so that they get what you might agree that the words coming out of your mouth match the words coming out of their mouth, but in their heads, they're drawing a very different picture of what that solution is and how it works. So this notion of demo or die, and it has to happen right at the forward edge. If that's going back to your engineering team and they're already building out in a demo, you've already wasted a bunch of engineering people's time, and engineering people are unforgiving folks. You waste their time and they're going to be pissed off. So you have these, whether they're forward deployed engineers, solutions architects, deployment managers, however you want to think about them, business analysts, these people live at the front line with your customer. And their job is to be this sort of, their time is like sacrificial time. They're the forward flank, and they are supposed to hear an idea, reflect that idea back, try to build out a demo. That's a PowerPoint. I live with a stack of these yellow pieces of paper on my desk. And if somebody comes to me on my team or whoever else, I draw something and I show it to them. They go, okay, yeah, that seems like what I want. Or we do a couple of them and that's not what they're thinking about. And we go back and we go through this process. But you really have to be critical of anything that's being asked of you from a customer. That's my, both because they don't know and because you don't know. It's a conversation of idiots. Neither one of you really knows what that's going to be, but together you could probably figure it out.
Yes. Yeah, great. And in between all that is humans trying to converse with humans, which is
totally, which is really bad. Yeah.
Awesome stuff. So I think we'll wind down most of our questions. Just want to encourage, we can spend, we'll close that early if there's no questions. But if people want to use the question function, ask some other stuff, I have a few teed up here that we'll begin answering. Please use the question function, and we'll kind of move on to formally addressing the audience stuff. So one quick one, but Drew, I think to clarify, how do you think of, especially, the question is, hey, can you obtain SBIR funding across different agencies? The answer is yes, right? But can you clarify a little bit how you think of managing that, right? Because you also have to balance, they're not going to pay you for doing the same exact work twice.
Right. Yeah, that's something you have to be really careful with. So we're on 3 or 4 big USAID contracts now, very big. And so there's this really complicated stuff that happens. So with USAID contracts, usually you get the consortium that if we're a prime on one and we're a sub on 3 others, I think, that consortium gets allocated a set of funding. In these cases, it's like $300 million. But you don't get any of that until you draw up a scope of what you're going to deliver, and somebody internally then agrees to that. So your consortium wins it, and then you have to win again to go get that money. So you're drawing up all these scopes of what you're going to deliver. And some of that is building stuff out. Some of that is a build process. Hey, we're going to, it's a research scope sometimes. You have to be really careful of separating all of that out and making sure you're not offering the same thing to them in research and having them pay for it that they're doing with the DoD. So be very, very careful of that. And it gets more and more confusing the more you spread across those pieces. But if you're smart and you can put a box around each piece, each module of a technology, you say, hey, we're going to build this module with USAID. this module with the DoD, and eventually everybody's going to benefit from those. We're going to bring them all together. And in fact, that bringing them together is its own scope that you need to get paid for, or you're going to pay for yourself. So think very modularly about the technologies that you want to build, about the solutions that you want to build. Some of those pieces, and some of them you won't even realize are pieces until you really step back and realize, oh, that is an important piece of this puzzle. That piece is valuable to somebody. You know, like the ability to learn between in a group of network devices. That in itself is valuable, but that's just one little piece. It's not actually solving anything yet, other than the ability to learn. But what do you learn? Well, that's a different piece. So yeah, you can work across them. It is complicated to make sure you keep those scopes separate. So you have to be smart about it, and good communication across your teams.
And even there's the intention and framing you brought up. I just want to highlight again, right, with the spirit of SBIR shifting more to these transition applications, right? Tell the story. Hey, like you said, hey, you know, this SBIR is paying for this. You know, we're doing all this other stuff on our own or via other partners that will eventually get us to this, you know, end state, right? And just keep people, you know, the SBIR folks are energized by that right now. So
yeah, you got to give them we imagine a world where there is
exactly,
and where there's this solution, where there's this capability. To get there, we need to do this.
Yeah. One question here around kind of the, you know, hardware technology, right? So a question about, is there a way to invite and maybe pay for military to attend like a brainstorm of a use case or interest? Because I know that's one of the issues that it's challenging to face. You know, actually getting meaningful face time with people is kind of hard sometimes.
Yeah, I'd contact your lawyers. I don't think you can pay the military to come to events, but yeah, it's really hard. So and we talked a bit about this yesterday. So again, I am not from the military, and for lack of a better way of explaining it, I had to fake it for a couple of years to figure out how to speak the right language, understand the real problems. And I think one thing I'm totally not afraid of is being the dumbest guy in the room. Maybe I just got used to it young, and you know, I've just been living it ever since. But that's really valuable, being the dumbest person in the room, just knowing you don't know stuff. So that helped me get to a certain point, and it helped we got our SBIR phase ones. I got to learn a lot. I did a lot of research. Then I found a really brilliant guy who became my sort of senior advisor, who has lived in the IC intelligence community for a very long time, and he is like a genius, and taught me things and would whisper in my ear and would join me at events, and he'd say, hey, I actually know this guy that is in that space. And you slowly start networking. But recently we invested in another incredible guy who now is the director of national security, who's from, you know, intelligence in the Army, and worked with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, et cetera, et cetera. And we have someone on our board who was previously the chief technology officer for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, Anthony Vinci. You got to start surrounding yourself with people that know the space and know people, because you're right. Getting to people is like extremely hard. It's like it's the number one indicator of whether or not you're going to be able to build a company out of nothing, is if you can find your way to people. And that's private sector, that's defense, that's everywhere you go. If you don't get good at finding your way to people, whether it's finding a charming way to introduce yourself on LinkedIn, going to events, if you're not the charming person, hire a charming person and make sure that they get those conversations for you, because that's the difference between success and going nowhere.
Yeah, no, I love it. And a quick side, I was gonna also share with the audience, you know, like exchanging information and actually financial resources back and forth can be accomplished with government agencies via CRADA, the CRADA. I think Kirk Burden put it in the question if anyone wants to Google it. But have you guys done any CRADAs, Drew?
No, I'm still working to understand the best way to use them. But yeah, that is on our horizon.
Cool.
Speaking of which, somebody put in OTA. Yeah, we do have an OTA. And what was the other half of the question? How do you utilize? Or it just went away.
Yeah. Have you utilized OTAs, and then how could a small business or new startup access OTAs?
Yeah, we got an OTA through the SBIR. So our SBIR ended up being contracted as an OTA. Yeah, I think that's the only way that I know how to get to them, and then working with that end customer on that, on what you want. And some are comfortable with them, some of them aren't. I think more and more people are getting more comfortable with OTAs. It's becoming a bit more popular, so that's a good thing. So I think getting through that and then working with their contracting offices to see if they're comfortable with that.
Yeah, and definitely, I think like OTAs are a tough front door for the government. Frankly, I think SBIR is a friendlier, or some of these amazing prize competitions, or a creator or open house with a lab. Those are better front doors, especially for an earlier stage business. I think, and OTAs, like to what Drew was saying, can be great. Hey, I've won the SBIR, I've been competitively selected for this technology. I find a customer maybe, and they help me, hey, we want to do more prototyping efforts, right? Because other transaction authority is a congressional authority that is used exclusively for prototyping activities. It's different from SBIR, which is research and development. So, right. As we move into I think a really good question from someone, Jeff, you may remember him from our team. He said he'd love to hear your advice about to other companies, the value of mentors and how a founder or executive can work.
Jeff's amazing. He wants people to tell him, Jeff is amazing. Yes. Yeah, Jeff is an amazing guy. You all should go work with Jeff Odlum. He's a brilliant guy. I mean, really. He is. I'm saying it in jest, but he really is. He was great to work with. Mentors, yeah, totally. And we've going back to some of these accelerators. Accelerators often, well, you should look at their their boards and the people that are connected with them. There was one we did at NYU, and that was really cool because we got was one of the catalysts. To working with the DoD as well, was one of the gentlemen was a colonel who was he's like the senior strategic advisor on tunnel warfare, and we saw that he was there, and you kind of go get him, go to those things with targets, go to those things knowing who's going to be there, what types of mentors they're going to be out there, because they're looking for somebody and you're looking for somebody, and you can hope that fate brings you together and the rose turns red or whatever it is. But most of the time that happens because you wanted it to happen. You went and found them. But yeah, mentors, that's a game changer. Using them right is a game changer. Keeping them interested. Just remember that you have to understand what a mentor wants out of it too. Don't forget about that. Mentors aren't just there to feel good about themselves and answer your questions. They want something out of it too. They want to learn something. They want to feel like they're valuable. They want to use their network. There is something, each one of them is different, but you have to make sure you fulfill their side of the story too. It's not just about you. You'll lose them fast. Yeah.
A wonderful theme for us to close on, again, thinking about the customer, thinking about the person on the other side of the table, both as a representative of that organization and a human, right? How can you help them? Applies to customers, mentors, friends, family, really everywhere. So a great feel good thing. So we'll kind of close it up here. Again, if you want to follow up with Drew or FedTech, just you can respond to the Eventbrite registration, or we have an email address, hello@FedTech, that we're happy to connect people after. But a huge thanks for Drew for joining us today, and thanks for everyone for attending. I want to encourage everybody. I think the SBA has another event right after this. If anyone wants to join in there, go to Small Business Administration America's Seed Fund Week. They have a website and everything. So encourage everyone to jump over there. To celebrate the 40th anniversary of SBIR ever being congressionally authorized. So that's a fun one. But yeah, thanks, Drew, any closing thoughts?
No, I appreciate the chance to speak with you all, and please do reach out and LinkedIn with me if you're interested in what we're up to, and keep an eye on our work, and hopefully I'll figure out where you all are and I can learn a bit from you. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks, Will.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. See you.
Be well.